Hi, welcome to the lecture channel. So yesterday when I was covering about memory performance benchmark via memcopy on a free NAS system via FreeBSD compile, I was mentioning about my Ubuntu server test setup in a VM wherein which I have configured or set up some ZFS pool. So some viewer have watched the same and he requested me to do a quick walkthrough, which is when I thought let me do a quick walkthrough so that I can show my setup. Earlier, like I mentioned in couple of episodes, I have tried with Ubuntu server manual MD array setup. I have done it manually via command prompt. As well, I have tried even doing via webmin and stuff like that. But as I mentioned in a couple of episodes, when it comes about NAS operating systems, I tried almost all available options other than commercially done ready to use products like Synology, Drobo and stuff, because I have a Netgear, but I got a taste about the same. More or less, if you buy whichever product, it is going to be the same. You are going to get certain limitations and you are mainly going to have this vendor lock-in and other stuff. So which is fine if you're not into tech and other stuff, and if you're just a user. But as I myself being a systems architect, I feel I need to have some better control. At the same time, I can write some scripts. I can write even a full-fledged C code with multi-threading and anything like that, and I can do several things in that I don't want to much use third-party plugin, so I have a different need altogether. So I have tried various options and I felt FreeNAS is well cooked and it is really robust. When you do the pool, it just works fine. So which is when I thought let me just use FreeNAS. But I was quite curious about down the lane as I was exploring FreeNAS and compared with other solutions, let it be Unraid, Rockstar, Open Media Vault and stuff like that. But I was quite curious about the OpenZFS, the overall technology, the architecture and the overall storage aspect of the same, the file system and stuff like that. So I thought since anyway ZFS is supported in Ubuntu natively, because you can install via apt command even the command line ZFS stuff. So I set up a simple Ubuntu server to test how reliable it is versus something like traditional MD RAID array which is possible in a Linux system. So I was quite amazed. It is quite good compared to MD array, something like MD array, where it is although you can create a volume with the ButterFS and stuff, but I'm still not liking that MD array. It is not that reliable. Sometimes you may have some mount issues. Sometimes, not mount issues. Sometimes you may have some import issues. When you destroy the operating system and try to import this drives with a different OS install and then get this MD array RAID and then try to import the same, so you will get all sorts of issues. That is why many have suggested better not to use ButterFS for a production system. Having said that, my Netgear uses ButterFS, but the thing is, you should understand it's been well developed and tested by a army of engineers who are working in Netgear. So obviously they will fortify that stack, and in case if something is lacking in the kernel stuff, they are going to address the same, and they have come up with their own UI and stuff like that. Of course they are going to address all these issues, but again you have this issue like vendor lock-in and stuff. So it is not a generic platform. Although it is taken from a generic platform, it is highly customized, well cooked product. Okay, so if you hop onto my system, this is my test Ubuntu server, and you can see here this is my VM. It's a simple VM. I can take you to settings. You can understand unlike FreeNAS, here the RAM requirement is not much, because it is just a test install, and moreover, this is not. I'm not sure about the OpenZFS in Linux, how it consumes the memory versus something like the FreeBSD version of FreeNAS. So maybe it may have the similar requirement, because the end of the day it is OpenZFS. The architecture is going to be the same more or less, whether it is ported on Linux or FreeBSD, doesn't matter. So anyway, I'm keeping I reserved around 5 GB of RAM, you can see here, for this VM. So once this VM kicks in, it should consume system resources to an extent. So I have allocated like 5 CPU cores. I'm not sure it is going to correspond to real physical cores in terms of its performance, but I just given this count, and you can see in storage, this is my OS drive, and in this the full-fledged Ubuntu server is installed, and in that I have also added this drives, VM drives in that storage controller. You can see the controller is SATA type, and I have added around 6 drives. I have named in a way that A1, A2, A3, A4, A5 denotes these are drives done at the time when I have created the system. In fact, I had another drive called A6, which is around 5 GB of space at that point of time. You can see here the drive space is 6 GB now. So the reason is I have even done a replace drive option in that ZFS pool in the Linux system, and I was testing how that replace drive will happen, and also I need to test in future how that regrow option happens when you replace all the drives, and the drive expansion is possible in a ZFS pool. So you can see here these are 5 GB drives, VM drives, whereas this one is a 4 GB drive. So what I can do is, when I replace this with a 5 GB or 6 GB drive, the ZFS pool should increase theoretically. So that's what. So with this setup, all possible test we can do. And in the network, I have some 2 adapters. One is connected via my internal network, which is connected through this pfSense router, due to which I can access this system via my local desktop and stuff like that. I can do file transfers and do test its performance. Okay, so that's what. So if we hop on here, this is my Ubuntu server, which has this ZFS pool deployed. You can see I can do z pool status and other stuff through command line. And if you do df, I have mounted manually, I have mounted in Ubuntu pool, because if you don't do that, if you don't set these changes, configuration changes, it defaults mounts on a folder like a / Ubuntu-pool. So the name of my pool is Ubuntu-pool. So that's what. So since we don't have any UI for this, you need to use command line instructions, which is fine again. Okay, but on the other side, if you think about a production system, I still want to stick myself with FreeNAS at this point of time, because it's not about you use command line instructions, it's all about command line instructions. I hate sometimes being a kernel developer, being a system software developer, is if you do a mistake, there is no warning anymore. Okay, so you can really literally screw up in a production system. So if you are using it for a production system, always a UI is better option, because the humans are tuned to get that, we have that cognition happens when you see a UI rather than some command line. A dumb command line, you can do any mistake, you can do an rm minus rf, and you can provide any path by mistake, whereas in a UI, chances of things happening like this is quite low. So always when I do some important backups, I always use UI, and sometimes I do automate stuff in command line. But again, if I do any database operations, I try to refrain myself doing a raw access to database. Instead I put a layer so that I can use a UI and prevent that raw access to the database. Similarly, if you are doing anything like this, prevent yourself, if you are a beginner, or even an advanced developer, prevent yourself using any command line instructions for a production system. I'm saying it's okay to use it for a test system, but for a production system it is better to avoid. So although I can do these things, I want to avoid myself, and moreover this is not having any SMB and other stuff installed, so that doesn't make anywhere as close as any full-fledged, well-cooked NAS operating system platform. So with this, of course, I can create volume. You can see this ZFS volume is mounted over here. So if I go here /mnt Ubuntu pool, I can do any file copy. I can test its performance. So it is going to be accessible like any other file mounted share. So that's what. So I have not created any data sets. You can see here it is pool which is created, and I have tried options like resilvering and other stuff. So if I type history, I can walk through some commands which I have done. You can see here you can set deduplication, enable, disable through command line, dedu pop, and it asks the permission. So you can set the same, and you can enable back with this. So you can do the same, and you can also do this drive replacement. You can see here I have done a drive replacement at this point of time. I have done an offline of the drive. Okay, you can see here, and then I have done a drive replacement, and I have, after it has been replaced, you can check the zpool status, and it happens like any ZFS stuff. So in FreeNAS you have the hardware which abstracts, you have this UI which abstracts, but beneath it, this is what it happens. But as I said, for a production system, there are so many other things makes a really full-fledged NAS server. It's not about having these commands and you can just type it. So that's all. But so far it is nice. I like this rather than my old MD-RIDE setup with Ubuntu server. I really hated it, and it is really not reliable. I'm not saying about you create something and then start copying files. I'm saying about you create something and then do drive replacements. You do try to screw up your pool or volume, whatever it is, and then you see how it performs in such situations. Okay, or try to emulate. I can even do something. I can go here, I can delete a drive and then boot the system, or else delete a drive, replace with something else, and then you try how the system is going to cope up. So that is when you can see how it performs and how critical it is, and it gives a real test whether to use a platform like this for a production system or not. Okay, so that's what. Apart from that, you can use some commands, like I can just quickly walk through some few commands. You can see here, you can see it's a free space and allocated space and stuff like that. So this is quite handy. So if you know bash scripting, of course you can do grep, and you can grep, and you can do Ubuntu NAS. So you can filter out that line, and then you can do set of commands like set or cut -f third field -d and give space, and you can extract whichever field you want if you know the same, and you can do anything. You can even write an abstraction layer on top of it. Even I have such stuff in my mind. I thought, let me write some PHP and MySQL LAMP setup abstraction layer on top of it and see, okay, do some experimental Ubuntu server control UI and see how it performs. Okay, so I can use it for any experimental setup or something, in case if it is found it is reliable. Okay, so don't feel bad, I'm not showing any step-by-step sequence how you configure a ZFS pool in a Linux server. Okay, Linux Ubuntu server or something. This is not a video about it. You can just read any guide online. That is not the point actually. So the point is all about assessing the NAS operating system, I thought let me cover and let me show a test setup, because one of the viewer have asked, and I felt even yesterday to cover something like this, because often you find when it comes to NAS setup, some YouTuber, he may be just a gamer, he may take some video about something about his setup. He will say that I bought some 10 NAS Western Digital Red drives or some Seagate drives, and then this is my hardware. I got a super micro board, and I have so and so ECC memory DIMM sticks, and then I have built my setup, and something they will share, and then you get lot of people discussing about it. And if you really analyze, 99% of them, all of them are either some system admins or some average home users who are into some gaming and some enthusiast PC build and stuff like that. They don't know anything about systems. So when you think about stack level, how things are orchestrated, it is very cutting edge when you think about OpenZFS. And that is when I started getting that curiosity to explore more and more. And I don't want to refrain myself for just exploring FreeNAS or one particular platform. I thought let me check all the NAS operating systems at the same time. I should not leave even this Linux variant of OpenZFS, which is when I thought let me have a test setup, let me do some testing in my setup, and then see how far it works out. Because when it comes about drive replacements and other stuff, such experiments, that's when I felt all the other options have really terribly sucked. Okay, so each one have sucked. Okay, I can say Open Media Vault, I have done a live demo. It is again issues with MD RAID. It is Open Media Vault, they have done a commendable job. It's a great UI. Unfortunately, their the RAID setup is happening in the MD RAID. It itself has that issue. Okay, so which is when I thought I can't use that for production setup. And when it comes to Rockstar, they have some GUI issues. Forget about any drive replacement. You may have suddenly a weird GUI issue, and I'm fine with buying the license, but I can't tolerate that sudden GUI bug. And again, it is having that issue. When it comes to Unraid, as I said, it is fine for some home media server, and I see no point in terms of using as a very reliable backup storage server. So that's when it stops. Okay, it may give a lot of hard drive space, but it is only a fool can compare ZFS like feature with something like Unraid, because Unraid is completely a different ballgame. It is completely different. I can use it as a home media server or something where I'm fine with losing something, and I'm fine that they are using parity and other stuff. But still, what is that I am worried is, if you have a file read operation, let's assume you are syncing your backups onto a remote server through rsync, like I discussed in few videos, or you are putting in Amazon S3 or AWS something. So if this pull itself has a file corrupted file is delivered, okay, when you deliver a file via TCP connection, TCP is going to do checksums, and many don't know that even IPv4 has checksum in its address. So you don't need to worry about file transfer. The thing I'm worried about is when it does a read, okay, Unraid, when it does a read, what if there is some corruption in that disk, and it is not going to check the parity all the time. You should understand, when you do a file read, Unraid is not doing a parity check all the time. Okay, it is only when you do a write, it does a parity check, it does a parity compute, and it is going to push that into the parity drive, and as well as it is going to push the data into the data disks. But if you do a file read in general, it is not going to check anything as such. So that is the main weak spot. So if that is the case, whatever you try to get out of your NAS server, an important archive which is stored for some time, you no longer have that assurance whether it has some sort of file corruption it has incurred or anything like that. So whatever you get, you may feel it is correct, and if you treat this as a master copy, then the reliability goes for it also. That's why I cannot completely support Android for that aspect. But other than that, for general media server or anything like a trivial use cases, it is fine. But I really pity any YouTubers using a setup like Android, thinking that they are saving a lot of drive space and they are getting additional space. But that is not the case. I am fine to lose some drive space. If you think about my setup, I have put around 10 TBs of space and I hardly got around 4 or 5 TBs of space. Rest I lost in terms of its dual parity. I set up both pools in one server in Z2. So RAID Z2 I mean. So I'm losing some amount of drive space, which is fine, because I have experienced a NAS setup like my Netgear with just one redundant drive, and what happens when you do any drive upgrades, any rebuilds, there are chances, especially in country like India, any power cuts may happen. This is the same thing with other countries as well. So I mean other few countries as well, Brazil and Mexico and other places. So whenever there is some kind of blackout, brownout, gray, or whatever name you call, okay, whenever there is something like that, what happens to your data? So when it is doing some rebuild or something, so that is when it gets tricky. Okay, and this is not something uncommon. I have seen so many people even from US discussing these aspects in discussion forums. Go and check any NAS discussion forum, they will be discussing that when I was doing resilvering, when I was doing some scrubbing, suddenly there is a power failure, and then when I restored, there is some goof up, and suddenly my NAS is giving all sorts of weird issues and all. So this is when I have tested even this scenario with ZFS, and I found it is very reliable. I have not yet tested such unique scenarios with Linux variant of OpenZFS yet. Okay, so which is why I can't fully comment whether this is reliable or not. It all depends how they have booted and how far the stack is optimized. For a lay person, they think okay, you have ZFS supported in Linux, you have ZFS supported in FreeBSD via FreeNAS. They think okay, let me compare this and that directly. It all depends how far they have supported the ZFS in a different platform. If you think about Linux, the kernel is released under GPL v2. The ZFS stack has a license called as CDDL or something like that. So it's a different license, due to which the ZFS, OpenZFS, is not natively pushed into the kernel source. If you go to the kernel source and if you explore, okay, you can go here and jump onto this file system subsystem folder, because each folder, if you are new to this, I can tell you that each folder is like a subsystem. You have networking, memory management, you have the core kernel, and you have the architecture. This is all about CPU architecture and stuff. So if you jump onto this file system, you can see there's a list of various file system. You can also see this ButterFS here, ext2, ext4, all sorts of stuff, but unfortunately you cannot find ZFS here, because kernel itself is released under GPL v2 versus OpenZFS is released under this license called as CDDL. So there is a sort of license conflict, which is why they can't bundle it along with the Linux kernel. And also, if they support via user space, they support it via something called as fuse, which allows file systems can be written in the user space, and the kernel has a fuse layer. Let me just show you an architecture picture. Fuse Linux kernel. You can go to images and find any image. So this image itself tells a lot. So you can see here, this is the architecture of Fuse. I don't want to redraw something which is already available in public domain. You can see here, this picture tells a lot. So if it is supported through Fuse, the problem is you have this kernel overhead, you have this stack running in the user space, whereas the kernel is facilitating it through this Fuse layer. So this adds a overhead. It is not natively supported. So all sorts of combinations are possible, which is why you cannot compare Open or ZFS install on a Linux server with ZFS installed with traditional FreeBSD or something like that. You need to analyze all these aspects before you come to a conclusion. And if you are a beginner, you are doing some sort of a setup and arriving some conclusion, an expert cannot ever agree about it. So you may put something and you may do some tests and you may say that, oh, it is working fine and I have this setup from past 3-4 years and it is all working fine in my home. This is not about your setup working in your home. It is about a setup which should work also well in an enterprise level situation, and if it works in enterprise level situation, it should work in most of the homes. So that's all about it. So if you dig down deeper, all these aspects are there. So as an expert, we need to analyze in this angle, not just that something Linux has, okay, let me just put something in Linux and then let me use, and this thing. So I thought, the mail I got is overall about this, and he also asked about certain questions about Linux based ZFS. So which is when I thought, let me compose everything in a nice video so that anyone can watch this, and it gives that overall inside systems level perspective. And before I conclude, I can also show you about Fuse ZFS. I found this interesting architecture picture. You can see here it is in German, I guess. You can see here in this, he mentions a picture like this. So this gives a clue that there is also a possibility that something like this existing in ZFS supported via Fuse. I'm not sure in general the Open ZFS how it is supported in Ubuntu kernel. Okay, so because if you search about the history of ZFS, there is a mention that Ubuntu supports within their platform which may not be bundled with other Linux distributions. So there is a lot of things happening beneath. I'm still not aware whether it is supported via Fuse or it is supported via kernel module inside the kernel. So unless until I get some picture, okay, I can't really comment about its various other performance aspect. Okay, so ls mod, I can check anything it shows ZFS. Yeah, this tells, okay, if you do an ls mod, this tells there is a ZFS kernel module is existing, which means this is not done through Fuse. Okay, if it is done through Fuse, there won't be any entry over here, which means there is no kernel module. It is running in the user space through Fuse platform. But this tells this is a kernel module, and 99% I'm sure this is been working from working inside the kernel space. So this is working as a kernel module inside the kernel space. So that's what, when you do an ls mod, it is showing this is a kernel module, and there's a module called ZFS is existing in the kernel space. So this tells maybe it is running in the kernel space, and some sort of recipe is something to work like this is created by Ubuntu. I'm sure if you take just like that some vanilla kernel and then you compile it and then you run it on a Ubuntu server, it is, or Ubuntu system, it is not going to show this entry because it may not have this supported. Okay, because you can see here, okay, you can go to this, you can see here in a kernel source there is no ZFS inside the kernel source. So this sort of recipe creation is done by Ubuntu team, and then they have created this stuff, they have cooked it maybe with ZFS support inside, because this will facilitate if you are using their Ubuntu server platform, it will have that native ZFS support out of the box. Besides, you can try some few commands like this fdisk-l. I can do a sudo su fdisk-l and see these drives which it gets showed up over here. You can see each drive, the VM drive, it is showing here as a physical drive. This one is 5 GB, this one is 6 GB. So with that you can analyze which drive is what, and other than that you can try this command again. This is quite useful. ZFS get all Ubuntu NAS, and this gives entire big picture of all the configuration. From this you can do a grep. You can see here grep comp. You can check compression is enabled or disabled, and dedupe it is enabled, disabled, and with the other command you can which as I showed earlier, with other set of commands you can anyway enable or disable. Okay. ZFS set dedupe off or something like that, and same way compression off and stuff like that. So using this you can do the same. So it is as similar as doing it in a UI, but again I'm saying this is not something to be handled just like that, because you are doing it in entire root permission, and any small thing you do, a screw up, it may entirely wipe out your ZFS pool, which is disastrous in a production like environment. Okay, it is fine in a test setup, you can recreate, you have all the available time, and there is no data in that test drives. Okay, but you cannot imagine something like this, some kind of raw access doing on a production setup. So that's what you need to be cautious. Okay, so you can try some few commands like this. I mean, you can search in general about ZFS Ubuntu commands, something like that, and you will get a list. It's not a question that you won't get any important resources. You can see here in the public domain you get a lot of guidance. That's not an issue. It's all about how do you do a setup, and how do you use something, a platform like this in a real production system. And in case if you make use of the same, it also quite important to have some abstraction layer rather than all the time getting some raw access and trying to access it in this way. Okay, so I am successful with this setup, and I have done, as I said, I have done various scenarios, including corrupted drive or not corrupted drive, like any damaged drive. Suddenly some drives will not ever work, so I have tried that scenario, it worked. I have done replacement, it worked. I am yet to do this drive upgrade of all the drives in that pool. I need to test that, and these are the things when I did with MD RAID, sometimes it used to give weird issues. Okay, it's not about whether you do in command prompt or you do with some UI with Open Media Vault or with some UI like webmin access. Irrespective of the UI, I felt MD RAID is really pathetic. Okay, so and if you are wondering about the access or access of this pool or something, it is quite easy. Okay, I can show a very quick demo. You can see here df command. You can see the amount Ubuntu pool is where the Ubuntu NAS is ZFS pool is mounted onto. So you can go inside this folder, and I can do a test wget because than doing SCP or something. Wget is far better because it is not encrypting any data, so that we get some performance, a proper measure of some amount of performance in a setup like this. Because since it is a VM setup, this is not going to do any justice. This is not a bare metal access to give any reliable performance metrics. Okay, I can do it from my Ubuntu host system /videos test1.mp4, and if I do the same, it should be able to pull that file. Okay, provided I have typed the address correctly. Okay, yeah, it is if config ping 192.168.0.88. You can see it is of course able to reach. I need to check whether this path is correct. yeah, you can see here it is able to pull at this speed. And if I check the performance of this versus free NAS, I feel this is a bit faster, but again, if you see, it is fluctuating. It is initially it was doing good, and then it has come down, and it again have to do with the same drive, because I have 5 virtual drives. You can see here, you have this 5 virtual drives, all are nothing but the same drive, and then you have also the source file, which is this. Okay, let me just cancel the same, which is the source file, which is also on the same disk. So unfortunately the disk is suffering pathetically. One side there are 5 virtual drives which is doing a simultaneous writes, and the other side you have this read operation, so which is why it is fluctuating the performance. But I feel it is reasonable enough for a setup like this. Okay, so let's not much go serious about this drive performance or access performance, because you can access like any ZFS pool mounted one. So as you can see, I can just use the same, and this is from the same drive, and again whatever it has, those 5 virtual drives all are again from the same drive. So which is why it is quite dangerous, and also it is going to put a lot of stress on the hard drive. You have some I think there are totally 6 VMs virtual drives, so you have 6 places simultaneous write is happening, and also a read is happening in the same drive, everything in the same drive. So that is why it is peaking up, and then it is going to come down again. It is going to do a bulk read and to store it in a buffer, and then it is going to do a bulk write. So it's going to flip-flop between these 2 states. Okay, so that is why you can find something like this. Again, if I do that, it may be unpredictable, it may take some time. So this won't happen on a bare metal access. You can see it is initially at 80 Mbps megabytes per second, and then it is coming down, and it is going to fluctuate between these 2. I have even done a full complete 2 GB file download tests, and I found it is little bit struggling, due to which everything happening on the same drive. So other than that, it is fairly fine, because it is not also like you do a file copy from one location to other location, from one folder to other folder in the same drive. Here you are doing a file copy from one place to split across onto 5 or 6 virtual drives. So okay, the drive have to really struggle in terms of doing one side a read and then write operation at multiple places. So that's why it is going to suffer. Okay, other than that, it is fairly good enough performance. I feel in bare metal it is also going to perform very well, but again for a production setup, I'm really scared to touch this or not. So with this, I would like to conclude this video. Again, I'm saying this is not a video about how do you set up a ZFS in a Ubuntu server or something. This is a wide, broad talk about the overall architectural perspective and few things what is happening inside the stack migration or the integration so far. So that's what. So if you have anything to discuss, be in touch via mail. Thanks a lot for joining me. Stay tuned. Have a nice day. Bye bye.